is Let Me Sum Up, your regular deep dive into recent reports on climate and energy. I'm Luke Menzel, recording on Wurundjeri land, and I'm joined today by my two co-hosts. Global Vice President for Marketing and Distortion at the Let Me Sum Up podcast, Frankie Muscovich. Hello, Frankie.
Good evening, gents. It's so nice to be back, for real, this year. My marketing and extortion muscles have atrophied a little bit, so that's what a good holiday.
Get back into the extortion gym.
That's right. Well,
pump some marketing iron.
I'm now very concerned at the mental picture that's painted for everyone who listens to this pod. But
rough up some other attendees at that gym and demand their money.
I won't be the only one demanding money from people, boom tish, on this week's pod. But it's lovely to be here with you from Gadigal country.
And a man who enters the year with a laser-like focus, as he will be working tirelessly throughout 2026 to make the distant dream of a border carbon adjustment a reality across this wide brown land. It is Tennant Reid. Good day, Tennant.
Well, a burning obsession in my heart, yes. Laser-like focus. Let's see. There's so many items on my to-do list. Focus is itself a distant dream.
Yeah, there's a few agendas running this year, and that'll keep us busy, both professionally and here on the podcast. On this week's show, we take a look at a new report from the Superpower Institute and ponder whether the worm has indeed turned, and the concept of carbon pricing might be on the up and up here in AU. But first, US Energy Secretary Chris Wright set the hairs running in Paris this week when he threatened to pull the United States out of the International Energy Agency if it continues to address climate change as a part of its analysis. Describing the IEA as a climate advocacy organisation devoted to leftist fantasies, the former fossil fuel executive reckons that the organisation should cut out the so-called climate stuff and narrow its focus to energy security, a position that got quite a bit of pushback from European leaders. So, Tennant, should we be dismayed or delighted by the prospect of the Trump team tearing up its IEA membership card?
Well, the thing to watch out for is probably the nether zone in between, where they keep threatening consequences and asking for concessions and never quite leaving, but throwing their weight around enough to significantly alter the content or the characterization of the information that the IEA presents. And what happened this time around the biennial ministerial meeting in Paris is pretty interpretable for anybody. So there was a general knock it off with this climate stuff push. There was a specific don't include the net zero emissions scenario in future iterations of IEA products demand. And this follows on the heels of a previous demand that the IEA restore the old current policies scenario to projections, which is the one where they would just say what would energy demand, energy markets, energy production look like if there were never another change to policy ever again, and you just extrapolate from current policy, which was one of the more wildly misused and misunderstood elements of IEA work back in the day. They phased it out because it was so misleading and replaced it with the stated policies scenario, which was a bit more what is the intent of current policy. And so if you had medium-term emissions targets, which didn't yet have completely fleshed out implementing policies for each of them, well, those targets would still be incorporated, for example. Now, the current policy scenario has been restored, but it would be a different matter to delete analysis of what would be necessary to achieve net zero. At the meeting, there was, as you said, Luke, there was pushback, and the final summary from the chair of what was said is it's very interpretable. It's not as climate forward a document as was seen 2 years ago. It hasn't excised the word climate, but the word sustainable appears more often. There are still references to energy transition and electrification and renewable energy. Most of those references occur in one paragraph that was clearly insisted on by basically everybody who wasn't the United States of America, that said, a large majority of ministers stressed the importance of the energy transition to combat climate change and highlighted the global transition to net zero emissions in line with COP28 outcomes, and goes on in that vein for like quite a paragraph. They just compressed it all into there with a characterisation that, well, not everybody agreed with this. We won't say who, but that was sort of it. So has like Chris Wright, or as energy maven Michael Liebreich has taken to calling him Chris Wrong, got his way? That'll do it, Michael. That's the knockout blow that people have been waiting for. Have they got their way, or are they basically being humoured? Like, it's a bit early to say.
I do wonder, given the balance of countries involved in the IEA, you can't see them willing to back down on a number of things the US might demand, right? And so, like, just, I guess having seen the established pattern of behaviour of this administration, I can't really see a huge amount of incentive for those other countries to comply with those requests or demands for concession, because, like, that's not going to be the end of it. It hasn't been on almost any other issue where Trump's kind of, or the administration's sought to move backwards on agenda, and then, you know, you think that they're done, and that just hasn't really happened over the last few years. So I just don't know what would be in it for the IEA. There's obviously a budget implication, given that the US is a significant contributor across the board, but not as much for IEA, I think, compared to other institutions. It's in the order of like 10%, something like that.
The figure that gets thrown around is 14% of a total IEA budget that was pretty cheap, 78 million euro in 2024. So the US bit of that would be in the order of 11 million euro a year, which is like more than I've got down the back of the couch, but does not seem beyond the wit of Germany, the UK, Australia, and other IEA members in good standing to find. They've just been joined by Colombia, I should say, and Brazil has officially started its accession process as a full member, and India's knocking at the door also. So the US is set to become an ever less financially important bulwark of the thing, but they are also like a country that matters quite a bit in energy terms, and to have them completely storm off in a huff, you could imagine that would have consequences in terms of data input, of staff collaboration, and of reach.
It does seem to me that the risk is what you say, Tennant, which is the US sticks around, makes a pain in the neck of themselves, influences the IEA in lots of subtle ways. Executive directorship of Fatty Birol has been really notable for how hard the IEA has leaned in on really helping the world grapple with some pretty sticky questions around climate transition, what it would look like, what it would actually mean in terms of technology deployment and transition and fossil fuel phase down if countries actually did what they say they want to do. And it's put a lot more flesh on those bones. The IEA has had license to do that, in some ways has been something of a safe space because it's the IEA, it's independent, and yes, it's got all these member countries that are making a contribution, but they've been that trusted advisor, and you can imagine the US removing some of that license in a really unhelpful way, and that would be a great loss particularly right at the moment when there is a lot of angst about, 1.5 and, all the other associated issues that we're grappling with in that space. The IEA is a very precious thing, and I certainly hope that the other countries and the other members around the table recognising that and are willing to continue standing up for the independence of the organisation.
And not walk back really important work that they've done in previous years. The modelling scenarios they've done on net zero are among the most widely used and referenced in the world. And, and a particular focus, I think, from advocates on use of what was, I think, an incredibly, as you sort of say, Luke, about Fatty Birrell's tenure in this role, a very bold statement around the need for no more investment and new fossil fuel projects, basically, on coal and gas. It would not be credible, I think, for them to walk back that work because the context isn't necessarily bearing out, a different sort of necessity into the future.
Well, over the past year and a month, we have seen a lot of people go quiet in the United States about things that they were previously quite vocal about. Various people walk back things that seemed like enormous priorities. It's early days in some ways. It doesn't, like that hushing and repositioning doesn't actually seem to be working out that well for anybody involved, and the winning team that they thought they were getting with or making inevitable concessions to is not so obviously winning as it was. But like, it does raise this challenge for like all kinds of wonkish data and just the facts ma'am oriented organizations and groups, when the facts lead you in a direction that is profoundly uncomfortable for people in politics or some political forces or whatever, and suddenly you find yourself in the middle of really heated political fights, do you go, oh, that's not, I'm here for the numbers, and just kind of soft pedal things or try and be as indecipherable as possible? Or do you just accept, oh, well, like I am here for the numbers and the numbers say something that's awkward but very well spreadsheeted. Yeah, it's like, I do not think that IEA people particularly relished everybody citing them as the authority for the world needs no more fossil fuel investment. And they'd supply various asterisks about how, well, that's if the world is indeed on a net zero trajectory. And like, if you do that, then you don't need this, and, various other qualifiers that don't really make it much less of an explosive thing to say. Like they have become a battleground, and they're getting battled. I declare World Give IEA People a Hug Day for the 1st of March.
Co-signed, hug an IEA wonk near you is the message from the Let Me Sum Up podcast. Going out to our Paris-based listeners, I suppose.
More and more of them, I'm sure.
Virtual hugs all round.
Lots of warm and fuzzies.
All right. Shall we chat about a report?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Since the repeal of Australia's first carbon price in 2014, placing a cost on greenhouse emissions has been regarded as something of a third rail in Australian politics. As a result, both major political parties have, at different times, pursued targeted emissions reduction efforts focused on particular sectors or categories of emitters, an approach many economists regard as highly inefficient. But to date, Australia's political class have proven impervious to the distress of boffins offended by the proliferation of second or third best policy interventions, more swayed by the scar tissue built up from a decade or two of climate wars. But should we let that long-standing political PTSD constrain the policy options on the table in 2026? The Superpower Institute says no. In their new paper, titled The Case for Pricing Pollution, they argue that the time is right to revisit this important area of economic reform, and that we should replace what they describe as a patchwork of inefficient emission reduction policies with two new taxes: a polluter pays levy targeting fossil fuels extracted or imported for use in Australia, and a fair share levy that seeks to capture more of the value of the profits generated by gas exports. So, Frankie, what do you reckon? Is the Superpower Institute making carbon pricing cool again?
They might just be. I think it's important to say up front, it is always really essential to have thinkers and advocates out there that won't shy away from harder conversations. Almost always it can push the conversation forward in productive ways. I don't think we should necessarily shy away from the conversation that this provokes just because of all that PTSD. It might be that we don't land in a place of saying, yep, let's definitely implement those things. This report is really timely. As we know, there are a couple of big ticket policy reviews scheduled for this year, most notably the Safeguard Mechanism review kicking off sort of 26, 27, and consideration of Tennant's beloved CBAM alongside it. Just sidebar, I told someone the other day they just need to say CBAM 3 times or they click their heels and you would manifest in the room. So just fair warning.
Yeah. Does this make me Rumpelstiltskin or Beetlejuice?
Undecided. But I digress.
Well, sidebar on your sidebar, and a serious one. When do we 26, 27? Do we actually know when the Safeguard Mechanism review is kicking off?
I believe that we can expect an initial what do you reckon type paper. Yep. Pretty close to the 1st of July.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
So
okay. Hold on to your hats.
And that's not public, right? Like
it is now, Frankie, because Tennant just said it on the podcast.
Sufficiently populated rooms.
Yeah. Okay.
Political staffers blame Tennant, not Frankie.
No. No, I think I'm just
blame the calendar.
Yeah.
Like when does 2026, 27 begin?
It was always
1 July.
It was always scheduled for 26, 27. I think it's become apparent that yes, this thing's going to likely run the whole length of the financial year. But the most important, consideration around timing of that review is that we'll have another year's worth of full data from the operation of the current safeguard to feed into it, if that's the case, which I think is
might be moot because we're chucking it for a polluter pays levy, Frankie.
Let's hold on to your hats here for a second. So I really like the way this paper frames up the challenge that we're sort of staring into, right? They call out kind of 3 big challenges, all of which are correct and very salient in the politics of today. One, we're not on track with current policies to meet the emissions targets that we've set for ourselves, certainly not on the 2035 basis. We know we need to double the rate of decarbonisation across the economy to be on track for achieving that target. We know also that the budget is under huge strain and there are some structural deficits that need dealing with. We've got an ageing population, we've got, baked in kind of increases to very valuable and worthy social services and supports that need to be paid for. But, like where's the revenue going to come from is a live conversation. And so you can consider this paper as I think a really good provocation to feed into hopefully broader based tax review because we need it. And thirdly, that, productivity in Australia is pretty weak. We're seeing sort of persistent stagflation. And, I think this paper makes the case that sort of combination of policies that we've got are not contributing to a productive economy the way that that the two levies that are proposed here would make a better contribution to in that sense. So this paper has two big ideas. My notes to the authors on the way through were, I reckon you could split these into two papers because they're really big, meaty ideas individually and in and of themselves, but they are connected. So we've got first a polluter pays levy. So this is an upstream carbon tax levied on companies responsible for the extraction, processing and sale of fossil fuels. This is the policy that they suggest replace the safeguard mechanism on the basis that it would more efficiently price carbon across much more economic activity, including sectors that aren't currently covered by the safeguard. I think in particular you could call in kind of, liquid fuels like diesel and petrol in particular. That's been a focus of other thinking. The Productivity Commission's had some things to say about that recently as well. It'd cover more and it'd do it in a more efficient manner. And I think most importantly, referring to issue number 2, it could generate some significant revenue that could be poured back into the budget bottom line to help fund decarbonisation, but also, and I think at that point you got to be careful about these conversations, just general revenue to pay for everything else that needs paying. The second idea, and I don't know if we want to talk about these things sequentially because there's a lot to each one individually. The second one is a fair share levy, and this is a rent tax on oil and gas production, and particularly focused on LNG. And the case being made here by the Superpower Institute is that the petroleum resource rent tax, which is the current attempt to tax resource rents in Australia, is fundamentally not really fit for purpose for the gas industry, where much of the export, and potential revenue might come from. And they suggest chucking that out in favour of this fair share levy, which would operate as a two-way cash flow tax, so that the government would take 40% of net profits over the course of projects. But equally, if they were loss-making, the government would be taking that same proportion of those losses. And so the TSI argues that in that way it shouldn't be a deterrent on investment the way that other forms of tax or levies in this space are often perceived. And I should say as well, it's modelled on, I think, what's called the Brown tax, which is what's held up as kind of best in class, world best practice, which is the Norwegian tax there, which has contributed very significantly to an enormous sovereign wealth fund over the last couple of decades. It's worth something like $2.7 trillion now. So they're modelling the design of that on the Norwegian tax.
And I think just it's worth pulling out how different an idea this this rent tax is from some of the things that people in broadly climate or environment land might talk about regarding the gas export industry, because the purpose of this design is not to shrink the gas industry, and it's not to stop or discourage the use of gas overseas. It is intended to be completely neutral, and whatever happens to overseas demand. It is just trying to get a larger share of the profit of that sector to be retained by the Australian people. And so it's very carefully intended not to just be led in the saddlebags of that sector. Although I'm sure there would be some squealing horses saying, no, this is not the way to treat this thoroughbred.
Well, there would be, but you direct those talking horses to the extensive appendix at the back of this report, which steps through
how much worse they could have it.
That's right.
Indeed, because they actually do the hard yards of cataloguing how different countries around the world that are fossil fuel exporters approach this and make sure they're capturing, dare I say it, a fair share of value for the public purse from these exports. And Australia is way down the league table in terms of, what it sticks fossil fuel companies for in terms of those profits.
Way down.
And they're trying to sum together company tax equivalents, rent taxes, royalties, and public ownership. Like, you can't take more of the profits from something other than, like, if you just own it, it all goes to you then. And there's one way or another in like basically everywhere that matters except the United States. There's a combination of all these things that amounts to honking big wadges of the profit. I think that's the technical term. Being retained by the state.
Yeah.
And the philosophical approach that successive Australian governments have taken to this issue, if you sort of take the Superpower Institute's analysis and think about like the place that we find ourselves in terms of structural deficits over the long term, their point is that if we had taken a different approach that is more aligned with some of these other countries and less aligned with the US, those structural deficits would not exist.
Yeah. I mean, I think the analysis is really smartly done here. I think the argument being made for reform of, basically a tax that already exists but isn't working particularly well, and you could argue maybe it wasn't designed in implementation and kind of argument around settings on the way through to work pretty well. We should, the need is clearly there. And we don't take anywhere near the take on these resources compared to peer countries around the world. I think there's a really nice, that's what you're referring to, there's a really nice table that kind of shows that with your state-owned, entities up the top, obviously, having it all. But, we're kind of right down the list there. And they make the case that if a change of this nature might have been made back when I think tweaks were made to the PRRT a few years ago. This was like 2022 or something like that. We would have been $80 billion better off in pushing ahead with the nature of reform as they've suggested here. So they're big dollars, not just kind of looking back to give us some melancholy and longing over what might have been, but also forward casting.
But you're right to point out, Tennant, this is not really a climate policy, except in the sense that it provides the government with much more revenue to do with as it will. It could devote that revenue to, economic transition, but this is really about making sure, fair share levy, the name's on the tin, that we're capturing the value out of those extractive industries.
And TSI they certainly have an idea of what to do with the loot. from both the carbon price component and the rent tax component, and like they leave most of this very, very much open, because actually everybody can come up with things that they would like to do.
Oh, and they will.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And just to name a few from pretty diverse stakeholders, you could ramp up defence spending in an uncertain world where some certainties are even less certain than they were. You could fund the NDIS further with fewer difficult choices. You could reform personal income tax. You could, here's a really popular one, you could reform company tax and have a more competitive rate of that. You could do all kinds of things. And none of the alternatives to funding those things leap out. They do have an assessment, which is drawn from the Productivity Commission's recent looks at Australian revenue side options. There's not a lot of options on that list that leap off the page as dramatically more popular and exciting to try and prosecute than this admittedly probably terrifying to a government prospect of attempting to wrest tens of billions of dollars of profit off some people who are very satisfied with where it sits at the moment. But like raise the GST, not a lot of fun. You got to be worth debating, not a lot of fun. Apply it to fresh food. You can make a spreadsheet argument for why that's a great idea, and viscerally lots of people go ick.
Oh, it's all hard. I mean, other kind of ideas that were put on the table were around cash flow taxes, like so reform to business,
like
or reform to business company tax, and then income. Like, if you're going to throw a blanket over the whole thing, you've got to think about how all these things work together. And there are have been some good arguments made for where you should look at broader based approaches to tax, including the GST, but as you say, that's not fun. It's not necessarily going to be popular, but the idea is that you're looking at that alongside personal income tax. And it's arguments you could make for choosing to tax consumption over income more.
Now, you could cut. I mean, this is a climate podcast, not a tax podcast.
I know.
But you could go on the other side and say, oh, well, we just need to get spending under control. And I was at an event recently where some extremely self-confident pollsters reassured the people present about just how intensely popular budget cuts were. They're saying, oh, we detect a great groundswell of support for this. And then people asked the pollsters, well, what, does that hold up when you ask about specifics? And the answer was, well, there's very strong support for some specific cuts. The thing that people polled were happiest to cut was overseas development aid, which, besides any other issues you might raise with it, is not going to fund a lot of anything else. Because it's not very big.
That said, and here's where the connection to this idea is worth kind of pressing pause and talking about. It's not highlighted in a way I thought it might have been in the paper, but they did commission some polling to go alongside this work, and it's interesting in that. The fair share levy, incredibly popular when it comes to broad-based polling. I would say though, and just to your point on specifics, I'm aware of at least a couple more polls more recently that have also showed rather high support for tax on gas exports, being quite specific. in the suggestion amongst the kind of cohorts you might expect it to be high in terms of people who vote Greens or kind of more to the left, but also in the kind of One Nation far right camp. So it's one of these policies that suggests there's a bit of a horseshoe where you see the extremes on both sides kind of meeting somewhere in the middle back on the other side. So I wouldn't I think there's something there that's worth unpacking, and people are tapping into that.
Well, for a government that has sort of been, at least parts of the government have been casting around for a big, bold reform agenda, the Superpower Institute is certainly serving one up on a plate, right? Like, I don't know, like you can argue it both ways. This would put a massive target on the back of a government and would give the opposition the chance to rerun an Abbott-style axe the tax campaign. But, as you say, it could be framed in a way that totally meets the moment as a big, bold reform that sticks it to the fossil fuel companies and allows us to do a lot of the things that we do need to do as a nation in terms of fixing those structural deficits and supporting the kind of spending that we need to make in a whole range of different areas. And you can kind of choose your agenda and choose your priorities on that basis. The thing I've been thinking about in terms of the politics of this is because the Superpower Institute is like, the best time to do this is like 10 years ago. The second best time is today.
Yep.
Like, we just need to go for this. Like, we should just reform it now. Or if you really want to, you could kind of use the safeguard mechanism review as a kind of like a launching pad for this broader reform agenda. The idea of doing this from a substantial, I guess, a position of strength in the lower house, like, I suppose there's an argument for that. It's also like a pretty big call to do something like this without taking it to an election, right?
Yes.
And so there's a world in which there would be a strong argument to say, if you really think you want to do something in this area, this is like a Howard government 1998, you know, I said never, never GST, and we said never, never carbon price. But you know what? This is the right thing for the nation. I'm gonna go to the mat and argue for it, and I'm going to get a mandate and then go and do it. Like the fan of democracy in me says that would be the way to do this, but it's an interesting question.
And so here's where I think this paper is sometimes not served well by putting these two things together, because I think you could make a much stronger case in some ways for going ahead with a fair share levy or reform to the petroleum resource rent tax. That's in a sense, you don't have to connect that in a policy making sense to the carbon pricing piece, which is the polluter pays levy. Arguably
trying to take them on at the same time would just, you'd have so many fronts of a contestation going simultaneously. It's like trying to attack Mordor and Isengard simultaneously. Bad idea.
Well, I think it would be easier in the context of expectation being built up around tax reform, and sort of plugging this into that discussion and reform arena on the fair share levy. Yeah. Expectations that have already been built that more substantive reform should be on the table. You know, Jim Chalmers got a bunch of people together late last year to throw ideas around, and like, you know, the PRRT being a bit crap at what it's meant to do was definitely highlighted on the way through. You know, there wasn't a commitment at that time to look into it. But yeah, I think you could separate this and plug it into the broader conversation around where we need to see kind of broader based reform on tax across the economy, because they do kind of call in examples of other areas that are connected to all of this, with road user charging and diesel, you know, sort of the fuel excise connected to the carbon pricing. So, yeah, I don't know. My suggestion would have been you could separate those out, but We have not spent a lot of time yet talking about the other big idea. Like, we got a bit excited about the many, many billions of dollars that might get poured into coffers for various things on taxing LNG exports properly. But what did you guys make of the design of the polluter pays levy?
So it is very interesting and provocative. And it's interesting for this podcast, given that last episode we were talking about a book that says all this carbon pricing stuff is a waste of time, and that what you really need to do is ramp up company taxes. And this paper is saying, actually, look at the evidence, company taxes ain't that great, and rent taxes are much better. But this is an in some ways old school view of the economics of carbon pricing, that you want the broadest coverage, you want to explicitly deal with things like compensation needs by having an explicit price, get the revenue, and then allocate bits of that revenue where they're really needed to address equity issues or other problems. And it's very keen on having like one price operating across as much of the economy as possible, rather than different price levels and choices by policymakers, or guesses by policymakers, substituting for the market reacting to a common signal. I think that it is a terrific provocation, and it's full of things that are quite different to the current design of Safeguard Mechanism 2.0. I am not sure that it's necessarily a great idea to just say, Safeguard, too bad, you're no good, get out of here, let's have a whole new thing, rather than to have a look at these ideas and think, well, why is the Safeguard designed the way it is currently? Some of it is intentional, some of it is evolutionary. Some of it is happenstance. And like, where can this kind of thinking be usefully introduced? And like, there is a lot in there. Like, why is it that the Safeguard must raise no money? Like, there's a very great aversion to raising any money. And there's two reasons, but I'll come back to them.
Well, I mean, I had heard a lot about this paper because it has sparked a lot of conversation in the circles that we move in, and had it characterised to me by various people. And one of the things that had been said to me is like, oh, they're really going the Safeguard mechanism. And when I read the critique of the Safeguard mechanism, I thought, oh yeah, it's kind of fair enough. Like, it's a fair-minded critique from a fairly dry economic perspective of the Safeguard mechanism. But a lot of the critiques were like it's not inherent. Like, as you say, Tennant, there's nothing inherent in the Safeguard mechanism. Like, you could have a big reform agenda that is focused on the Safeguard mechanism and actually construct it in a very different way, right? Exactly.
Make a series of changes to the Safeguard that would make it look like quite similar to what is proposed here. And philosophers could have a fun argument about whether the Safeguard of Theseus was still in any way the safeguard that set out from the minds of Danny Price and Greg Hunt and Nick Xenophon 11 years ago.
But it's an interesting question from an argumentation point of view, because they could have framed this paper as a reform agenda for the Safeguard mechanism.
Yes.
Right? Like, this is how you fix the Safeguard mechanism to have it make sure it has the characteristics that they regard as delivering an economically efficient outcome. But they've chosen to say safeguard mechanism, throw it under the bus. We've got a big new bold idea.
I think there are olive branches towards the former in this paper. Like, I think if you read...
In this draft of this paper, yes, there are.
Yes. And so, whilst some of us might have been familiar with earlier versions, like, I do think that I think it is very hard for economic purists to, in a piece of thought leadership, want to sort of
do the iterative thing,
sacrifice the ideal, and sort of automatically make concessions or kind of pragmatic moves out of the gate.
And from a thought leadership point of view, actually, it's probably better to just put out the big bold idea and kind of like set out the ideal, right? Because inevitably it's going to go through a process and going to be, put into the box of reality of like what's actually achievable.
Well, and I do think they've acknowledged that in the way they've framed the recommendations. They've sort of, they've of course like not shied away from saying we think this is better, but if there's not the appetite for that in this review, could changes be made that put it on a pathway towards this? So I think they are nodding at that throughout. We haven't kind of talked about specifics, right? And I think sometimes we assume too much about what people understand around these things. But it is I think we should just sort of note that the proposal here is to apply this levy at coal, oil and gas extracted and consumed in Australia and to fossil fuel imports, including oil, petrol and diesel, so those liquid fuels that we mentioned earlier. It would apply differently, right, to the way that the safeguard currently does, which is at that facility level, whereas here, they're sort of specifying there was about 140. This is very much kind of upstream at the fossil fuel extraction sites and operated by, around 60 companies or something, and they'd be liable for payment of that tax on their scope 1, like fugitive emissions, and then scope 3.
Yeah. Well, the downstream combustion emissions ascribed to that fuel. And so that price signal would then spread throughout the domestic economy.
Yep.
You and I would pay this when fueling our cars. Effectively, the remaining coal-fired electricity generators would pay and recover whatever they could in the electricity market. Although the electricity market looks very different to the last time we had the last time we had a carbon price in the electricity sector, and the pass-through of that would look very different. And so they do propose compensation arrangements to assist households and small businesses in a couple of ways with that flow-through. To go back to a thread from just before, the two reasons why the safeguard doesn't raise any money right now is, one, deep PTSD on the part of the Australian Labor Party about the whole anti-carbon tax campaign of 2011 through 13, reaching a crescendo in 2014, and just can we not have any association with that, to the point of continuing officially to more or less pretend that the safeguard mechanism is not a form of carbon pricing, although it is. The second reason there's no revenue, though, is that there was an actual idea at the beginning of the safeguard mechanism. Danny Price, had a bad 2025 federal election. But back in the day...
Do you want to just explain that quickly?
Frontier Economics, Australian lead economist, and you might have seen him in the news last year saying that several... Were these a good idea? Policies from the federal opposition, once and future, were the best ideas ever, and he had the numbers to prove it.
He did the report that backed in the nuclear policy.
Yeah.
Right.
Nuclear policy
and the gas
a
stuff.
particular version of gas reservation. Yeah. Although everybody loves gas reservation now. So I'm told.
Didn't it come out that he only did the modelling on gas after it was announced? I'm sure that
Yes.
Anyway, very much in cahoots.
It's not the first time that's happened, I'm sure, but it's rarely so obviously confirmed. Anyway, back in the day, though, he had the view, and he still has the view, he's not a man who changes his views very often, I think, that all this conventional wisdom about carbon prices being best when they are full bore, straight out, put it on everything, same level, that was wrong. He had an intellectually consistent argument that, which I've never completely found persuasive, but it was consistent from him, that the burden of a full carbon price exacerbates deadweight losses from all the other taxes in the system. And exacerbates deadweight losses. And in his view, you can't get away from this properly by doing like double dividend type, use the carbon price revenue to cut other inefficient taxes. And whether that's right or that's wrong, his solution to that was just price the margin of emissions where it's actually going to motivate a change in behaviour or investment, and that's where baselines come from. And the idea of like adjusting baselines or having crediting of people who do better than their baseline and use by others. Like it comes from this view that you're better off not raising the money in the first place and unnecessarily crimping growth rather than raising the money and then handing the money back. Now, if you don't think that argument is right, and I don't think there are any people in the country who are like rigorously committed to this intellectual argument except for Danny Price, I could be wrong, but if you don't think that on a theoretical and I've got my model worked out level that argument is right, then there is actually no reason except your reading of like opinion polls and your wake up in a cold sweat nightmare reminiscences of the early 2010s. There's no other reason to be obsessed with not raising any money through the safeguard mechanism. We tax all kinds of stuff with taxes that are like shithouse, some of them, and this is considerably less bad than most of those things, maybe all of them.
And the other thing I like about what the paper does is it does try and map some of the terrain about where sort of redirection of that money back to would be most important to consider in the first instance. So they do talk about relief for households with two separate programs around $4 billion, I think, each over the course of a decade, and then one for small business. So I think the households ones, super fair enough. The first one is really around ameliorating any just price increases experienced mostly through electricity, and they do harp on about the importance of electrification as an agenda alongside all of this. And then I'm sort of particularly glad that they raised the issue of the second package, which is more around like a more concerted support and effort for households that are going to struggle potentially, and like this is a familiar hobby horse for apartment dwellers who might have will experience kind of higher barriers to entry for installing EV chargers or solar and batteries on site, things that are going to stop them from accessing the benefits of electrification, particularly low-income and vulnerable households.
Although I did wonder, with the way that they had structured those recommendations, the targeted support for lower-income households still seemed to be structured as we'll give you some money and hope you do the right thing with it.
Yeah.
Rather than actually sort of thinking about like the kind of infrastructure and deployment models that you would need to put in place to actually shift the needle in terms of electrification and efficiency. And it was a very kind of economist mindset.
Oh.
Like, we'll give them the money and they'll obviously go and buy a heat pump or whatever to improve their circumstances if that's maximising their utility. Like I did wonder a little bit about that.
Like, I agree with that. I also don't think that that's their particular bag.
Sure. It's mine.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's mine too, Luke. So I think what we could say is there are other programs and ideas already out there that you could reference in that respect.
But it is also, you know, bundling it up into the kind of like, this is how we do this thing and we make everybody's lives so much better. Like there is part of the sales pitch which will be, we will fix all the houses. We will make them warm and comfortable and resilient to a changing climate. We'll make them electric and powered by renewable energy. We'll pay for it through these series of significant tax reforms. And it sort of goes to the some of the deficiencies of the way that this was approached the last time we had a go at this, which is like, if you just give people money, like you're taking money away in one place and giving them in another place, the degree to which they notice that and the degree to which they recognise that, oh, I'm being compensated, but the, you know, people that are kind of like using this as a cudgel to beat the government over the head with, like they just get to say, you're being taxed, you're being taxed, you're being taxed. And, you know, it's like, but you're getting some money back. Like it's a hard thing. Whereas if you can point to substantive things that are changing that people can see rolling out through their suburbs and through the regions, and like they're actually giving that visceral lived experience of like, oh, this is actually good and this is what I'm getting for this thing, that could be helpful.
I think this is a difficult space, and the world is full of disappointing and awkward facts for every single point of view on it. For example, some people of a grey-haired vintage may remember back to the Clean Energy Future Plan era under the Gillard government, which had a bunch of revenue raised from carbon pricing and a bunch of compensation spending. And they may go, oh, but the problem was they didn't market it well. They didn't, like, people didn't know that the bump up in their family allowance or whatever was associated with the carbon price. And who could have foreseen that an opposition could be so irresponsible as to say they would abolish the tax but not the compensation? Well, I don't know, maybe our imaginations should be larger. But in Canada, the separated at birth twin of Australia in all kinds of ways, the federal government there did do a carbon price, a couple of carbon prices, one with a per capita regular check, like saying this is your share of carbon price revenue rebated to you, Canadian family. And not only did people not fall in love with the carbon price, but the Canadian opposition leader at the time, he's lost his seat since then, although maybe he's got it back by now, literally ran an axe the tax campaign. And so, like, maybe nothing you do guarantees popularity. And the polling that it was done for this work saying, actually, people, if you frame it as a polluter pays thing, people love carbon pricing. Well, there'll be a lot of people trying to reframe it as something they don't love, and that has worked in the past. But we have, like, things have moved along. The context is different. The choices in front of governments are different. Who knows?
I mean, in some ways, it's the right time to be having this conversation, right? We've got a freshly minted 2035 target. We've got a growing awareness that we're going to need to push past electricity sector decarbonisation over the next decade, and this package, and particularly the polluter pays aspect of it, would be a really powerful tool to start doing that. It's also challenging from a political communication perspective as well, because global momentum in this space is fragmented, and there are many other concerns competing for voter attention. The much more modest reforms in terms of the tax agenda in other parts of the economy, which arguably have more public support, are struggling to get momentum. And so I can imagine a scenario, and it really comes down to the Trump of it all, right? Like, had that election gone a different way, the appetite of the government to take on, a big, hairy reform like this could plausibly be greater. And it's a heavier lift, and not just because of PTSD or anything like that, just because of like the operating environment. So it just raises the degree of difficulty, which is not a reason not to do it, but it is something that, is worth acknowledging.
Yeah. I mean, I think we would be a bit foolish not to reflect on the real politic of all of this right now. I mean, you spoke to the kind of global landscape. Like domestically, we've also got a federal opposition that's chucked out any semblance for the moment of a commitment to net zero or kind of workable policies that would reduce emissions that have kind of broad-based buy-in. So I do think it's like, I think that there is sort of so much material and lessons to be drawn from at past attempts that could inform a very smart, thoughtful approach to how you could message reforms like this. And I also think people like me certainly fail to grasp the creativeness to which scare campaigns can be drawn up. And you'd have to think that there would be a particularly high risk of something like this here. I do think, though, that the paper being launched out early this year with plenty of time before the safeguard review starts, I think it is an incredibly positive provocation, at the moment, to get people thinking kind of along the lines, kind of both calling out on the way through, why have we approached things with the safeguard, this way? It doesn't have to be that way moving forward. I think so long as we all kind of engage thoughtfully from here on out could really kind of broaden the conversation we want to have over the next little while when it comes to this review and make more significant reform possible.
Yeah.
As always, we close out the show with one more thing in which we all share something that is currently captivating our attention. Tennant, what have you got?
I have something that is seemingly irrelevant, yet uncomfortably resonant, which is a very old TV show, or in fact a mini-series from the 1980s heyday of the mini-series, called V, which is not to be confused with V for Vendetta and is not to be confused with the 2009 TV show Resurrection or with the mid-1980s TV show version. This is a mini-series, and the reason I bring it up is because I've recently rewatched it, and even though parts of it are terrible, parts of it are great. This is a show in which alien spaceships show up all over the Earth, hovering iconically over cities in a manner that would be done with better special effects a few years later in Independence Day. And the friendly visitors say, we have terrible environmental problems at home and we need your help. And in return, we'll share all of our knowledge with you, and it's wonderful. And then gradually things start to seem quite sinister. And there is a gathering aura of incipient authoritarian takeover, and outgroups are stigmatized. They're scientists who are stigmatized, and everything which in the 1980s seemed like a sort of thuddingly obvious metaphor for 20th century fascism and looked like vaguely ridiculous that this like people could just not be catching on to what was happening. Now seems like an uncomfortably political show. It's pretty good. It is worth watching. Also, it is very obviously the inspiration for purple suit wearing lunatic and best-selling author David Ickey's theory that blood drinking alien lizards are the secret overlords of the world. It's a much better show than anything connected with David Ickey. If you've never heard of him, Frankie, bless you.
Shall I keep it that way? Like venture no further? Or?
I think you should. I think you should keep it that way. What a loony. But also a straight-up plagiarist.
Is this show on a particular streaming service, Tennant?
It's quite hard to find, which is making this a really unhelpful recommendation.
So listeners should just show up at your place to try and watch this.
That's right. I think that's what I've just put myself in for.
You're going to have to carry like bootleg copies around with you on USBs to just distribute to people you meet.
I guess I can come to your place. I don't know if anyone else can. It's quite mean of you, Tennant. Frankie, what have you got?
Well, in a very bizarre reversal of roles, I'm here to plug the final report from Australia's carbon leakage review.
What?
I know. I'm just going to enjoy the look on Tennant's face when I.
What? Where did your laser-like focus go, Reed?
I know.
Fucking alien lizards.
Spaceship's got in the way.
Tennant relying on Muscovich to keep the dream alive.
Well, I think it's a reflection of the contagion that is sort of spread through the community, right? We're all pumped.
CBAM fever.
We're all CBAMers now.
Oh, so the final report is out. It was.
What was in it?
Like a report that looked not very different from the draft report, I think, in the end, which was not very unexpected, I think. This report's been gathering just smidges of dust on the shelves of government the last year or so.
I really enjoyed Frank's very diplomatic response when he was asked this question on Radio National Breakfast, and he said, the government has elected to consider this in the context of the safeguard review, and therefore there was no great hurry.
That's right.
This report.
And, I mean, like, I actually can't talk about this without mentioning that they chose to release it on #LibSpill Day.
Well, it was a Friday, which is the traditional takeout trash day, but also like the additional kind of blast zone of like, literally no one except Radio National Breakfast is going to pay any attention to this because the libs are tearing themselves apart. And you know what?
They were right. More or less, except for one T. Reid and a few other of us CBAM sickos.
Well, and like one A. Taylor, who has included an anti-CBAM plank in his pitch for what his leadership is about.
But that was part of the net zero position that they landed on with the Nats already. So it was already scorched earth, Reid. So what do they recommend? Do a CBAM.
Great idea.
Technically do a Boca.
We are. Are we still we're trying to make Boca happen, right?
I don't know.
I don't think it's going to happen unless we consistently call it Boca.
Oh, yeah, that's the power that we have at the Lady Summer podcast.
Refer previous conversation about stretching, marketing and extortion muscles. We're going to manifest this thing, guys. Boca, baby. Here we go. Well, and so it's not much changed from where the draft was kind of heading. Focus on imports. Start with cement and clinker. Look at expansion or including lime, hydrogen, ammonia, derivatives as steel and iron and glass. Don't do one for exports. There's sort of a bunch of well, for the time being.
Interesting arguments to be had.
Well, indeed. And sort of separate recommendation around just, I guess, sort of considerations if they were to go ahead to implement. Like, here's some things you should think about. Notably, the interaction with things like TIBA concessions in the safeguard. And also really interestingly as well, that government, a recommendation that government should engage in multilateral and plurilateral forums. So, I think there's certainly interest and momentum behind conversations around carbon pricing in Asia Pacific more broadly. We talked about a paper last year that put the case for the Asia CBAM. So I think they're sort of very much leaning into some of that concept, but at the very least, just improving interoperability of these things. So I think the only other thing to say is there hasn't been any kind of formal response from government alongside the report's publication. They're going to consider what to do about this whole BOCA thing alongside the safeguard review.
And dear listeners, given the paper didn't change that much over the course of over a year, if you want to find out what we think about all of this, you could go all the way back to November 7th, 2024, just a border carbon adjustment, adjusting carbon at the border. Open parentheses, definitely not a CBAM. Close parentheses is the episode to look for.
I love that.
Get our take on this important policy reform.
Still great.
Yep. All right. For my one more thing, I've got something fun as well. I went to the movies this weekend with friend of the podcast, Anna Freeman, and we saw epic Elvis Presley in concert, which features a whole bunch of super fun, restored footage, largely focused on Elvis's time performing in Vegas, which Australian director extraordinaire, Baz Luhrmann, found as part of the research process for the Elvis biopic that he released a few years ago. It is super fun. It is frenetic. It is heavily edited. It is like just a vibe and an experience. And it's short. It's like, there can't be much more than 90 minutes. And I was just grinning the whole way through. There is one particular scene where he's got 3 different takes of the same song that is being sung at the same tempo. One is a rehearsal just when Elvis arrives in Vegas. Another is him performing it on stage early in his time, like late 60s, so quite a fit, trim Elvis. And then he's got another version which is like late sort of mid-70s Elvis. And it's just incredible, the cuts in between all of these different takes and the way that the performance evolves over the time. If you just feel like being in a completely different space in a movie theatre for an hour and a half, I highly recommend. And I will say I'm not like the biggest Elvis fan in the world, but I developed a new appreciation for the talents of this individual. So, epic. In cinemas now. Not a sponsor of this podcast. Frankie, maybe you should get onto that.
Oh,
thank you very much.
Put it on the list. Oh, thank you.
All right. That is almost our show for today. But we do record bonus episodes here at the Let Me Sum Up podcast for our beloved subscribers, the folk that support us on Patreon or subscribe in Apple Podcasts. I will note here we do need to own up to the fact that we have promised our faithful subscribers 6 sector plan episodes. We have to date delivered 5 of them, and that is something, we're transparent here at the Let Me Sum Up podcast. We own up when we've fallen short of our commitments to our listeners. We will redress this. There is one final sector plan to come. It will not come this week, but it will come soon because we are just locating the appropriate expert to join us on that final leg in the sector plan odyssey. So that is not coming in the feed this week. So resources mavens will be disappointed for at least another couple of weeks. However, you can salve that wound with the topic that we are talking about this week, Tennant. What have we got?
A little thing that we've already mentioned, the libs bill, and just what the new normal in the federal opposition means for the climate and our beloved energy systems. We don't, in fact, know it all, but we will wave our arms and think about a lot of things that we do know, and we've digested them for you.
I think what you're trying to say, Tennant, is we have scintillating insights that are essential listening for anyone engaging in the national policy and political debate.
I myself will assuredly scintillate. I'm urging now my fellow podcasters to put on sunglasses lest they be dazzled by the multicoloured efflorescence of scintillas that is coming their way.
Okay, now you're over-egging it.
Yeah, even I think that was a tad much there, Reid.
Walk. No, hang on.
It's run. You run. You don't
fine.
walk.
It's fine. I just need to. Just take a leisurely stroll towards letmesumup.net. Click on support LMSU at the top of the page. It's not how quickly you get there. It's that you get there.
Actually, it is, Luke. Do it now. Just hostile takeover at this point.
You will find your way to our Patreon, and you too will be able to access that sweet and scintillating boko. That is now our show for today. This podcast was edited by energy professional and podcast tragic Mark Spencer from Here Media Studio. Frankie, you like promoting things. What are you going to promote today?
Apart from the 50,000 other things I just flogged at everyone in this episode.
Mate, why don't you provide a freebie to our friends in the space, and you could give a shout out to Sydney Climate Action Week.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. Yeah, I forgot my sneaky tea. Well, I'll get that in right now. Because I'm feeling charitable this evening, and I'm not going to tell you to go buy more T-shirts or double subscribe to the Patreon. We should tell you that coming up in March is Climate Action Week Sydney. Climate Action Week happens every year. In Sydney, it runs in March. This year, it's the 9th till the 15th. And there's a great website that lists out all the events going on. Like, there are some that are private and invite only, but there's quite a lot that is open to anyone who'd like to participate. And in some cases, they're hybrid online options as well. So it doesn't matter if you, gentle listener, don't reside in Sydney or won't be there that week. There would be other ways to participate. So we'll stick a link in the show notes. And I know that organisation I work for is hosting an event. We've got Will Nankervis, the Australia's climate change ambassador, doing a bit of the road to COP31 look ahead, as well as what the Pacific is looking to get out of COP. So that ought to be fun, but lots of other really great events on. So check it out. Don't miss out.
I believe the organisation responsible for the report that we did on this very episode, the Superpower Institute, with our friends at Climate Resource, are putting on an event.
They are.
All kinds of great events.
It's going to be great.
So get on that. There'll be a link in the show notes. But for now, for Frankie Muskovich and Tennant Reid, I'm Luke Menzel. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon. We've had Safeguard. We've had Safeguarder.
Oh, what's the...
And we need to buckle up for Safeguard with vengeance.
A return to form.
Oh.
Well, in the movies, it was a return to form. In Safeguard Land, Safeguard 2 was much better than Safeguard 1.
And I guess on point, Die Hard with a Vengeance was not scripted as a Die Hard film. It was like a complete other movie.
Called Simon Says.
Yep. And then they were just casting about for a script to stick a Die Hard sort of framework around.
So Ross Garneau is Jeremy Irons.
Oh, my God.
Yes. We brought it home.
There's the T-shirt. I don't know if Ross Garner will be happy with this, but I think it probably has to happen now.
There you go. Flexing those marketing muscles. That's good.
Well, it's you fine gents that just gave the source material right there.
Nothing bespeaks marketing magic like a reference to a 31-year-old movie.
Well, we never did the Bowen Safeguarder T-shirt, so maybe we could do like
I think we'd now have to do the full trilogy.
We could do a series,
a
right?
trilogy of T-shirts.
But does the first one have Greg Hunt on it?
Yeah. Yep.
Yes.
Surely this is going in an outro.
Yippee-ki-yay.